There are people who remember feeling different before they even knew the word different existed. As children, they would sit quietly while others played. They would stare at the sky and feel something they couldn't name. They asked questions that made adults uncomfortable. Questions about death, about purpose, about why people fight. And when they were told, "You're too young to think about that," they felt confused because they weren't thinking about it. They were remembering. Dolores Cannon often spoke about souls who carry awareness from other lifetimes. Souls who don't arrive empty, but loaded with emotional memory, wisdom, and an unexplainable sense of déjà vu toward the world itself. She said these souls usually reveal themselves early, not through talent, not through intelligence, but through recognition. As children, they feel older than their age. They prefer adults to kids. They feel protective, observant, cautious. They sense emotions in rooms before words are spoken. And most of all, they feel like they don't belong here. Not in a dramatic way, not with sadness. Just a quiet knowing that this place doesn't quite match them. Dolores Cannon described this as the signature of an old soul. A soul that has lived many lifetimes. A soul that has learned loss. A soul that doesn't chase novelty because it has already seen it. This is why childhood felt strange for you. You didn't want what everyone else wanted. You didn't crave attention. You didn't feel competitive. You didn't need to prove yourself. You watched. You observed. You felt. While others were learning how to survive, you were trying to understand why we exist. And that made you feel isolated, even when surrounded by people. Dolores Cannon said old souls often feel lonely, not because they lack connection, but because they carry depth in a shallow world. They listen more than they speak. They feel more than they show. They sense patterns in people before situations unfold. As a child, you may have been called too sensitive, too serious, too quiet, too deep, but those weren't. They were markers, signs that your consciousness didn't start here. And if this resonates, if you felt this since childhood, it's not coincidence, it's continuity. Because souls don't reset between lives. They carry forward. And some of them never forget who they are. One of the strangest experiences old souls report is this quiet feeling of being out of sync with their generation. As a child, you may have felt like you were watching a play instead of participating in it. While others chased trends, games, approval, you stood slightly outside the circle, observing human behavior like it was a story unfolding. Dolores Cannon explained that this happens because old souls arrive with completed lessons. They're not here to repeat cycles of competition, jealousy, or validation. They've already lived those lives. So when other children were driven by excitement and impulse, you were driven by understanding. You may have preferred deep conversations over small talk, books over crowds, solitude over noise, meaning over entertainment, not because you were antisocial, but because your nervous system was already tuned to depth. Dolores Cannon said many old souls feel an invisible weight, not sadness, but gravity, a seriousness that doesn't belong to childhood, yet shows up anyway. You weren't depressed. You were aware. You noticed when adults lied. You sensed tension in homes that looked happy. You felt when people hid pain behind laughter, and you couldn't unsee it. This is why you matured early. Not because you had to, but because you already were. Old souls don't rush into adulthood. They arrive there. And because of that, childhood felt confusing. You didn't understand. Cruelty, bullying, status games pointless, drama. It all felt unnecessary. Dolores Cannon described this as soul fatigue. Not physical exhaustion, but a tiredness with repetition. Your soul recognized patterns before your mind could explain them. You may have felt like you'd lived before, like this wasn't your first time here, like you were returning, not arriving. That sense of return never fully left you. Even now, as an adult, you might feel older than your peers and interested in trends. Disconnected from surface-level culture, drawn to history, spirituality, or ancient knowledge. That pull isn't random. It's memory. Not conscious memory, but energetic memory. Dolores Cannon taught that old souls don't seek attention. They seek alignment. They don't chase success. They look for purpose. And that's why, even as a child, you weren't trying to fit in. You were trying to remember. Remember who you were. Remember what mattered. Remember why you came. And that quiet knowing never really left you. There was a kind of loneliness you felt that never made sense. You could be surrounded by friends, in a room full of laughter, in the middle of a crowd, and still feel separate. Not rejected, not unwanted, just different. Dolores Cannon said this is one of the clearest markers of an old soul. Because old souls don't feel lonely due to lack of people. They feel lonely because they carry a different depth. As a child, you may have struggled to explain yourself. Your thoughts didn't translate easily. Your feelings ran deeper than words. You noticed things others ignored. And when you tried to share them, you were often met with silence or confusion, or jokes that brushed it off. So you learned to stay quiet. Not because you were shy, but because it felt pointless to speak when no one truly heard you. Dolores Cannon explained that old souls have already experienced lifetimes of connection and loss. They don't attach quickly. They don't open instantly. They observe first. This is why you didn't trust easily. Why you sensed people's intentions. Why you could feel when something was on before it showed. Your loneliness wasn't emptiness. It was discernment. You weren't searching for company. You were searching for resonance. That's why shallow friendships drained you. Why surface conversations bored you. Why you longed for someone who understood without explanation. As a child, you may have bonded more with animals than people. Or with elders. Or with imaginary worlds, books, dreams, stories. Those places felt safer. They spoke your language. Dolores Cannon said old souls often carry a quiet grief. Not for something they lost here, but for places they don't remember consciously. A sense of home that doesn't exist on Earth. And that creates a soft ache. Not painful, just persistent. You may have felt it at night, staring at the ceiling. Or during long car rides, or when watching the stars. A strange longing for somewhere you couldn't name. That wasn't imagination. That was recognition. Your soul remembering other worlds, other times, other lives. This is why you never fully fit into groups. Why you walked your own path. Why you felt like an observer in your own life. Not because you were disconnected, but because you were awake. And once awareness appears, you can never return to unconscious belonging. You carry something older than this lifetime. And your loneliness was the first sign that you were never meant to be ordinary. There was a sensitivity about you that adults didn't know how to handle. You felt things deeply, not just your own emotions, but the emotions of everyone around you. When someone was sad, you carried it. When someone was angry, it unsettled you. When tension filled a room, your body reacted before your mind understood why. Dolores Cannon explained that old souls often arrive with open perception. Their emotional senses are wide, unfiltered, because they have already learned how to read energy in past lifetimes. This is why loud environments overwhelmed you. Why conflict made your stomach tighten. Why raised voices felt painful instead of normal. You weren't weak. You were perceptive. As a child, you may have cried easily, not from self-pity, but from empathy. You felt for strangers. You felt for animals. You felt for stories that weren't even real. And people called you too sensitive, too emotional, too dramatic. But Dolores Cannon taught that sensitivity is not a flaw. It is advanced awareness. Old souls don't block their emotions. They read them. They sense undercurrents. They notice what goes unsaid. They feel the truth behind smiles. That's why lies bothered you. Why injustice haunted you. Why cruelty shocked you. You couldn't understand why people hurt each other on purpose. It felt unnatural. Because your soul remembers worlds where cooperation mattered more than power. As a child, you may have avoided conflict. Not out of fear, but because it felt pointless. You saw through arguments. You sensed that ego, not truth, fueled them. Dolores Cannon said old souls don't enjoy winning. They enjoy understanding. This is why you preferred peace over being right. Silence over drama. Depth over popularity. Your sensitivity wasn't something you learned. It came with you. From lifetimes where awareness meant survival. From realities where energy mattered more than words. And that made childhood hard. Because this world trains people to numb, to harden, to ignore what they feel. But you couldn't. You still can't. And that's your strength. Your heart stayed open in a world that teaches closure. That's not accidental. That's memory. Your soul knew how precious awareness was. Long before this life began. While others dreamed of status, attention, and approval, you felt strangely unmoved by it all. You watched people compete. Climb ladders, chase titles, seek validation. And something inside you whispered, "This isn't it." Dolores Cannon said old souls don't reject success. They simply see through it. They understand, on a soul level, that external rewards never satisfy internal hunger. As a child, you may have been confused by ambition. Why did people fight so hard to be seen? Why did popularity matter so much? Why did winning feel empty? You didn't envy what others had. You questioned why they wanted it. That's because your soul already knows what fulfillment actually feels like. Old souls aren't impressed by surfaces. They look for substance. This is why you weren't motivated by trends. Why you didn't care about fitting in. Why you felt uncomfortable pretending to be someone else. You would rather be alone than false. Dolores Cannon explained that old souls carry a natural detachment. Not coldness, but clarity. They don't bind their identity to possessions, titles, or opinions. They know all of that fades. This is why you never chased crowds. Never needed applause. Never felt complete from external praise. You wanted meaning, purpose, truth. Even as a child, you felt uncomfortable when people bragged, when they exaggerated, when they competed. It felt unnecessary. Your soul had already outgrown those games, and that made you different. Teachers may have thought you lacked motivation. Friends may have called you boring. Family may have worried you weren't driven enough. But Dolores Cannon said old souls don't lack drive. They lack illusion. They don't chase things because they already know what doesn't last. That's wisdom, not laziness. This is why you're drawn to simple living, quiet success, meaningful work, deep connections. Not flashy achievements. Your soul isn't impressed by noise. It's drawn to truth. And that truth has followed you since childhood. You weren't born to climb ladders. You were born to see through them. And that ability is one of the clearest signs that your soul has been here before. At some point in your life, you probably felt it. That quiet sense of familiarity with things you couldn't possibly remember. Certain places felt like home even when you'd never been there. Certain people felt known the moment you met them. Certain moments carried a weight that felt ancient. Dolores Cannon said this is one of the strongest signals of an old soul. Because memory doesn't only live in the brain. It lives in energy. You may have experienced déjà vu so strong it stopped you in your tracks. Moments where time felt layered. Where past, present, and something else overlapped. Not imagination, recognition. Dolores Cannon explained that old souls often carry residual awareness from previous lifetimes. Not full stories, but emotional impressions. A sense of how things unfold. a knowing of how cycles repeat. That's why you often sensed outcomes before they happened. Why you weren't surprised by betrayal. Why you understood loss before it touched you personally. Your soul had seen it before. This is also why certain historical periods, cultures, or spiritual traditions draw you in deeply. You don't just find them interesting. You feel connected, as if part of you remembers living there, as if the symbols feel familiar, as if the language resonates. Dolores Cannon said old souls often feel nostalgia for times they never lived in this lifetime, longing for ancient worlds, for simpler societies, for eras of wisdom. That pull isn't random. It's memory surfacing. You might have felt emotional watching old movies, visiting historical sites, or hearing certain music without knowing why. Tears rising without a story. That's your soul responding. Because memory doesn't always come as pictures. Sometimes it comes as emotion. And you've carried that emotional memory since childhood. It's why you always felt slightly out of place in modern life. Why fast culture felt shallow. Why you longed for depth in a world that rushes. Dolores Cannon taught that old souls don't adapt easily to the current world system, not because they can't survive here, but because they remember different rhythms. Slower, quieter, more intentional. And that creates a subtle sadness. Not depression, just a gentle grief for something lost. Something your mind can't name, but your soul remembers clearly. You've lived before. You've loved before. You've lost before. That's why you move through this life with caution, with compassion, with understanding. Because to you, nothing feels entirely new. And that familiarity, that deep internal recognition, is one of the clearest signs your soul is ancient. There is something you've probably carried for as long as you can remember. A strange sense of responsibility. Not just for your own feelings, but for everyone else's. When someone is upset, you feel it. When there is conflict, you instinctively try to soften it. When people are struggling, you want to help, even when it costs you. Dolores Cannon explained that old souls often arrive with a caretaker frequency, not because they're meant to sacrifice themselves, but because they've learned, through many lifetimes, how fragile human emotions can be. You may have been the child who tried to comfort adults, sensed tension between parents, became the mature one, too early, avoided causing trouble, not because you were afraid, but because you understood. You didn't want to add weight to an already heavy world. Old souls often feel like emotional anchors. They stabilize rooms without speaking. They calm situations just by being present. Their nervous systems are tuned to regulate, not escalate. Dolores Cannon said this happens because old souls have already experienced lifetimes of conflict, war, loss, and chaos. Their souls are tired of destruction. They crave peace. That's why drama exhausts you, why arguments drain you, why you'd rather walk away than prove a point. You're not avoiding confrontation. You're choosing harmony. This is also why you sometimes feel guilty for saying no. Why you overextend. Why you put others before yourself. Your soul remembers times when community meant survival, when protecting others was necessary, when empathy wasn't optional, it was life-saving. But here's the part. Dolores Cannon emphasized. Old souls must learn balance. You are not here to carry everyone. You are not here to fix every wound. You are not here to sacrifice your peace. Your compassion is a gift, not a debt. And learning when to step back is just as important as knowing when to step in. You may feel tired sometimes, not because life is hard, but because you've been carrying emotional weight that was never yours to hold. Old souls feel deeply, but they must also protect their energy. That's the lesson now. Not to harden, but to choose. Choose where your heart goes. Choose who you help. Choose when to rest. Because your soul is wise, but it still lives in a human body. And even ancient souls need care. That's not weakness. That's honor. You weren't born to save everyone. You were born to remember who you are. And sometimes, the greatest healing is letting yourself finally be held too. Deep down, you've always known. Not in words, not in thoughts, but in a quiet certainty that never needed proof. You knew you were different, even before you could explain why. Dolores Cannon said old souls don't discover their nature. They remember it, and remembrance doesn't arrive as information. It arrives as resonance. That feeling you get when something feels true without logic. That pull toward wisdom instead of noise. That discomfort with superficial living. That's memory waking up. You may not remember past lives. You may not see visions or dreams. But your reactions reveal everything. You respond with patience where others explode. You choose silence where others argue. You walk away from chaos without regret. That's not learned behavior. That's soul age. Old souls don't need to be loud. They don't need to prove anything. They don't need validation. They've already lived through being admired, being hated, being powerful, being forgotten. So in this life, they choose peace. This is why you crave. Honesty, simplicity, deep connection. Real meaning, not applause. Dolores Cannon said old souls often feel like they're finishing something in this lifetime. Closing cycles, completing lessons, letting go of karma that no longer applies. That's why you feel a pull toward healing, forgiveness, release. Not because you were hurt more, but because you've lived long enough to understand what pain creates. You no longer want to repeat it, and that is wisdom. If you've ever felt tired of conflict, tired of proving yourself, tired of shallow goals, it's because your soul is done with those games. You came back this time not to fight, but to balance. Not to compete, but to understand. Not to conquer, but to remember. And that's why your childhood felt different. Because you weren't learning how to be human. You were remembering how to be conscious. So if this resonates, if you felt this since childhood, you're not broken. You're not strange. You're not behind. You're ancient. And ancient souls don't rush. They walk slowly. They observe deeply. They love carefully. Because they know how rare awareness is. And now, you remember too.